and I do want to get to this video on your screen. This was released by the IDF not too long ago, as they do say it shows Palestinian gunmen opening fire on a group of people waiting for aid in Gaza City. This comes after the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry claimed it was Israeli troops who began shooting. The IDF responded, saying it investigated and found Israeli troops did not fire any gunshots. At least 21 people were killed, more than 150 others believed to be wounded in that attack at Kuwait Square. I do want to talk more about all of this and the latest developments on the war itself. So let's bring in Mark Chandler at Coastal Carolina University. He, of course, is the Director of Government Relations and also a former senior defense intelligence official. As always, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help break down the latest headlines. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Josh, and good morning.
Good morning. Well, this appears to be the second time that we have seen the IDF release video to kind of provide more detail, more context into a situation where gunshots were fired during a situation where Gaza residents were waiting there for aid. We do have limited information about this latest incident, but your thoughts overall as this is developing and you see that video?
Well, Josh, I saw the release of this video last night, and I looked at this. And first off, let me explain that combat and a combat environment is a very confusing and very chaotic environment out there. And so you mix that and you throw in a civilian and especially a relief supply situation like this, and you're going to create more chaos. But as you look at this, Israel does monitor these convoys through the video. And that's obviously what you have. An unmanned aerial vehicle video playing back on this situation. Now, Israel doesn't control the distribution sites of this. So you look at this, Israel was not engaged. They were not there. But you see a general tendency, as you just pointed out, and I can actually go back to the hospital explosion a few months ago, where Israel was initially blamed for that attack and that explosion, and it later turned out to be Hamas. So I think you're going to find these situations. The tendency, unfortunately, is to immediately blame Israel for such an incident. And so when you start to look at how this plays out, I think you're going to see, let's pause on the initial reporting and then work our way into some evaluation of this, not just blame Israel at first.
And it is important to note that the IDF went and did this investigation almost immediately after hearing of the incident. They hear Hamas's claims and they go and investigate right away. It was that same situation with the hospital attack where they were blamed. And then the situation, just a few weeks ago, also at an aid distribution site. So it is important to note the IDF does go and investigate these incidents, right?
It is very important. And Josh, there have been some incidents where individual or even a small IDF unit has actually done something they're not supposed to do. I'm not going to say it's a violation of the law of armed conflict, but, it violates the principles of military action. And Israel has actually punished some individual soldiers and small units. So I think you need to step back and you need to pause when an incident like this happens. As much as there's pressure on Israel about the security of the refugees and the overwhelming number of civilian casualties in this situation, Israel is trying to maintain in a chaotic combat environment the highest principles it can for conducting these operations in a very, very complex urban warfare situation.
And reports are starting to circulate here that Hamas's #2 military commander, Marwan Issa, has been killed. How significant would that be if he was eliminated there by Israel?
Well, this would be a very significant move. And I believe you're referring to the reports that came out from the IDF earlier in the week, where they conducted an airstrike in Gaza where allegedly Issa was holed up in some of the tunnel networks, along with a few of his deputies. He's the #2 military commander for Hamas. So by taking him out, this would be a significant blow. He was a key planner and coordinator and commander for the October 7th terrorist attacks on Israel. So you look at this would be significant. Now, They need the confirmation. We need to get some DNA data. We need to really confirm that he was there. And they haven't come out and finally concluded that they got him. And you want to be careful with this. This is something the U.S. does all the time. Before we give a final confirmation, we look for that exact DNA data or match. So doing this, Issa he's kind of known as the shadow man, because Israel has been tracking him, trying to locate him for decades. He's been involved in numerous Palestinian terror attacks against Israel. He was one of the masterminds and commanders behind the October 7th attack. So this would be a significant blow to the command and control, the ability to move Hamas fighters around the battlefield if, in fact, he was taken out. And I think also it'll start to show, since Israel is going after the leadership, as you should in a military campaign, it's going to probably strike a little bit of a blow to some of those other leaders and the morale of some of the fighters.
Netanyahu calling that latest proposed deal by Hamas that's been discussed by the war cabinet there, he called it ridiculous and absurd. What do we know about the deal, and how does it compare to the others that have been on the table in the last few months?
Well, there have been several, and obviously Netanyahu has said this before about the last two proposals that Hamas came back with. But he did, after saying that, say that they will discuss it. They had a war cabinet meeting yesterday, and after the conclusion of that, and this is a positive sign, I think, Israel said they are going to send representatives to Qatar to discuss this latest proposal. But what the proposal does from Hamas is it sets up an immediate ceasefire where hostages are released. Now, they talk about elderly women, some elderly individuals, and the sick, but Hamas doesn't give any details there. What is the number? We know that there's about 134 remaining hostages, of which approximately 30 are estimated to be dead at this time. But Israel's looking for names to be released. We haven't seen that through the international community at all at this time. And those hostages, they're key, and Hamas knows that they are key and gives Hamas leverage. So as they work their way through what Hamas is going to do, I think we may see, and I don't want to present too much hope to the viewers, toward the Israelis or anyone looking for a peace deal, but we may see an opening here that we can establish some sort of basic ceasefire and get some hostages released. Now, Hamas has called for up to 1,000 Palestinians to be released, some of those serving life sentences. And those serving life sentences were the ones who killed Israeli citizens, committed terrorist attacks. And so now you're talking about a significant trade-off in what's going to happen. The sticking points overall in this deal, Hamas wants a complete ceasefire and a complete withdrawal of the Israeli forces. Israel wants all the hostages back and the elimination of Hamas as a fighting force. So I think what you see is those two opposing positions right there are going to prevent a long-term ceasefire. But the fact that Israel sent a delegation to talk gives me a little bit of hope that we may see a small breakthrough here in the near future.
Netanyahu also saying that he has approved a plan, an IDF plan here for the Rafah offensive, something that we have been talking about for weeks at this point. The U.S. has actually said that they want it to be more of a targeted effort. They don't want it to be a large-scale operation. Is Israel likely to listen to the U.S. on that front, or are they likely to move ahead with their large-scale operation that essentially has been planned now for quite a while?
Well, I don't think Israel's going to listen to the U.S. on how to conduct military operations. And if I were in Israel's shoes, I wouldn't either. Because you have your military objectives that Israel has set out, and that's the elimination of Hamas. Now, Rafah is a key component to Iraq. There's at least 4 battalions, and what that equals is several thousand Hamas fighters who are positioned in the Rafah area. So what you're looking at, and I believe what Netanyahu approved, although no one has seen the specific details, would be a phased campaign to move into Rafah. One of the key components that Israel has stated they will do, it's what U.S. has called for, the international community has called for, is the evacuation of the refugees, about 1.3 million refugees. This is a difficult task. It's made even more difficult by the fact that Hamas will likely refuse to allow many of those refugees to get out. They'll stop them through military action or they'll stop them through some sort of coercion. But Israel, first phase, will start to get those citizens out, those refugees out of there. Hopefully, the international community can help that. And then what I think you're going to see, and it's really happened in Khan Yunis. So Israel's adjusted its tactics to more targeted, more precise operations when they identify through an intensive intelligence effort, the location of these Hamas strongholds in the tunnels and fighting areas. So you're going to see phase two probably consist of directed or specific artillery strikes along with airstrikes to go after those Hamas strongholds before you see the ground forces move in. And when I think you see the ground forces move in, it'll be in the smaller scale tactics and smaller scale units that they've been conducting up in Khan Yunis. So a couple of things. One, they have to finish in Khan Yunis. There's still resistance, Hamas resistance there. And if they move too soon to Rafah, that leaves them vulnerable to attacks from that area. So secure Khan Yunis, evacuate the refugees out of that area, and then start with a specific targeted campaign. So you're not going to see an attack into Rafah tomorrow. But I think as you start to phase this over the next few weeks, you could see operations step up there. But look for getting those refugees out of there and starting that first. And hopefully Israel will get some help in that.
Let's talk a little bit more about the U.S.-Israel relationship, because just a few days ago, headlines were made when Chuck Schumer gave about a 40-minute speech on the Senate floor. He said Netanyahu has lost his way, and he did call for a new election there in Israel. We do know Schumer is the highest-ranking Jewish official there in the government. So my question for you, does that show any sort of shift there in the U.S. and Israel relationship to hear those words from Schumer?
Well, Josh, I really don't like to jump into politics that much, but what I'm looking at right here is pure political drama out there. And I don't think it's positive political drama that Schumer started with this. First off, it's not good when you go out and publicly criticize a Democratic ally and you start to publicly criticize that ally that is in combat operations, that's fighting for not necessarily its sheer existence, but the continued peace and prosperity for the region. So you look at that. I think what you're really seeing here is kind of a smear Netanyahu campaign, because this was, and it's not publicly acknowledged, the known facts that Schumer was going to do this was relayed to the White House. And I think you see that reiterated when President Biden came out and reinforced, if you will, what Schumer said. He didn't push back on that. Now, speaking specifically to what Schumer said, if the Israeli country, if the Israelis wanted a new leader, they have a parliamentary system. They could right now establish a vote of no confidence, and then they could have to form a new government, a coalition forces. But you've had a solidified war cabinet that started out on October 8th, the day after the attacks, and they've stayed together. Is there dissension? Of course there is. There is in any kind of situation like this, in any kind of governing coalition. But I think if the Israeli people, in a vast, overwhelming majority, wanted Netanyahu out, there is a way to do that right now. So I think we have to trust in the Israelis themselves to see how they want to proceed with this campaign to eliminate the Hamas terrorist organizations. And it's really not the United States' goal to start to interfere in another country's, especially an ally's, government and governing process. So I think there's a lot of anti-Netanyahu in this approach that using Schumer to voice things. And it's in a political year. The far left and the progressive side of the Democratic Party, and again, I'm talking politics, is starting to push. And in this election year, I think you see politics being played here and play into a certain element of that Democratic Party, that Democratic left-wing aspect.
I do want to go to the north right now, take a live look here at the Israel-Lebanon border as we talk a little bit more about the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, we do know that there's a French plan for a truce between Israel and Hezbollah that is being discussed right now. Is it possible for there to be any sort of truce between Israel and Hezbollah? Because days ago, we're talking hundreds or more than 100 rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israel. So the fighting is intensifying there. Is a truce even possible between the two?
Anything is possible, Josh. So when I look at the elements of this, though, and you know, you have to understand the French have a history in Lebanon. They have a history in Syria and the Middle East. So I think they're trying to use some of their history and leverage within Lebanon to try to push this peace proposal. But as I look at the peace proposal, it's actually a reiteration of the existing UN mandate that stems from the 2006 Israeli-Lebanese Hezbollah war. And so I look at that. For example, there's talk of pushing Hezbollah forces further away from the Israeli border. Well, that's in existence in that UN mandate today, that there are supposed to be no Hezbollah forces within 18 miles of the border. And so what we're looking at is trying to really reestablish the existing UN mandate. And so I don't know that's really going to go forward in the current environment that you have. And the key thing, the French gave this proposal to Lebanon. Lebanon has no authority or pressure that they can levy against the Lebanese Hezbollah. So if Hezbollah does not agree to this, there will not be any kind of peace arrangement. And the U.S. has had an envoy going back and forth trying to work the same issue. But Hezbollah has to agree. It doesn't matter what they say in Beirut, what Lebanon says. If Hezbollah doesn't agree, there won't be one.
When we do talk about Hezbollah, again, just days ago, we had more than 100 rockets that were fired into northern Israel. There's been a lot of fighting back and forth. So why at this point has Israel not officially declared war against Hezbollah? We know it was very quick to declare war against Hamas after the October 7th attack.
Well, I think Israel is, and I hate to say it like this, but you look at they're familiar with the Hezbollah enemy. And they face these kind of attacks sporadically throughout the time. So what we're trying to do is, this would be a lose-lose proposition to declare war on Hezbollah at this time. And I want to characterize this in a military term we would use is Israel's conducting what we call a holding operation to the north. So they're doing this through a series of retaliatory strikes, and you've addressed. I mean, Hezbollah has attacked Israel with rockets or missiles almost every day this week. You know, not just the 100 barrage that you mentioned earlier, but the fact that it's an almost daily occurrence. And then Israel strikes back. And in showing the intelligence intensive aspects to this operation, Israel's starting to strike a little bit deeper and focus on some leadership and planning cells to stop future attacks. So I think this holding action allows Israel to have the right amount of forces there while concentrating their main effort down in Gaza, while preventing a wide-scale war up to the north. This would be very destructive for northern Israel. There's over 100,000 Israeli citizens who have been displaced in the north. And so I don't think Israel wants to see that kind of destruction up north. And Hezbollah, they're keeping this just below that threshold that I've talked about, enough to inflict confusion and a little bit of pain on northern Israel, but not enough to warrant an overwhelming Israeli response that will destroy significant Hezbollah infrastructure in the southern part of Lebanon.